The following podcast is an enticing media production. Thank you for listening to this podcast. You are now socially obligated to pour yourself a drink, and welcome to the Drunk Squirrel.
So we were starting this youth event, and I was getting music going.
Okay.
And I was using Pandora at the time.
Yeah.
The free version.
Yeah, that's what I use.
Yeah. Because it works. It was great. It is great.
Mm-hmm.
So we're getting the youth event all set up, and the free version has those commercials that come on like every 30 minutes.
Oh, you know what? I think you may have told this in another episode, but keep going.
Yeah, so I mean, we're getting set up. A commercial comes on, and it's Trojan Man, yeah, flying across the room to find the phone. No. I bought Spotify that day.
So that was a problem at church?
Well, I mean, I'm pro kids, so I mean, I don't want Trojan Man commercial. Have kids.
Yeah.
Bring them to church.
Yeah.
Ta-da.
Here's your Trojan Man.
Okay.
Oh, well.
Hi, Kenny.
Hi. We're recording.
We are recording.
We've been recording since you started your condom chat.
My condom commercial.
Your condom commercial.
Sponsored by. No, we're not.
We are not sponsored, but I would take their sponsorship.
I would too. Who am I kidding?
I mean, it's not like it's a... Yeah, anyway.
We'll take any sponsorship.
For the most part.
Any.
For the most part. So if you are listening and you'd like to sponsor...
Absolutely. And
we'll send you some information.
I was supposed to do work this week while I was on vacation to actually get the Patreon set up.
Oh.
Yeah, that didn't work.
That's because you
were on vacation.
You don't realize...
We were on staycation, and my wife stuck a paintbrush in my hands.
You don't realize that you don't have the time.
When you have the time.
When you have the time.
Yeah.
You thought you did, but anyway, we're rambling on. Why don't we...
introduce our guest?
Rob, you organized this, so why don't you go ahead and introduce our guest today?
I did, and I think there's a great preface I can set up there. I've been doing church ministry a long time. I told you one of those stories. Mm-hmm. I guess that was 2 episodes back. One of those wow, what the heck moments with interacting with church people. And it is not one of your stories. Sorry. But I figured this would be a good one to have Don Beatty on, who is one of our church guys. And Don, you and I have interacted over the years. You've shared some stories. You have lived a full life. I have questions about how you married the woman you married, because I see her as a saint, and, well, you're Don.
And I'm
you're a good guy, but... Yeah. Kenny and I have a thing we say around here of we really outkicked our coverage with our wives.
100%.
So. Yeah.
Yeah. I definitely outkicked my coverage.
Yeah. So, I mean, we get that.
Yeah.
But, yeah, Don Beatty, you are one of the church guys. You have all kinds of stories, and I got questions, and I think it's going to be a great conversation.
He should have a name tag that says church guy.
Church guy. Oh. Yeah, there's a whole thing.
Yeah. But, Don, welcome.
Well, thank you. Glad to be here.
Thanks for hanging out with us for a little chat this Saturday afternoon.
It is a Saturday.
We actually made some time on the weekend, and we're not recording on a Monday night or something, which happens sometimes.
Yeah, not doing a double episode on a Monday night going, why are we drinking on a Monday? All right. So, Don, I kind of started as we were getting the mics warmed up with a question. I think it's a great question to start. How did you meet Maggie?
Yeah, and that's one of several funny stories, about the whole situation. But we were in college together. I was a year ahead of her. Sophomore, she was a freshman. And the drinking age in New York was 18. And a bunch of us had gone up to New York and had a couple. And then we came back for the dance. And Maggie was just standing around. Her sister was up for the weekend, her younger sister. And so I went over and asked her to dance. And she did, which that was a big step.
Yeah.
What, you asking her or her agreeing to?
Yes.
Or both?
Or both. So anyway, we pretty much danced all night, and I walked her back to the dorm. That's another big step. And so we were going to meet for lunch the next day, because they had sit-down lunch in the cafeteria. And I waited and waited, and then she came walking out. She didn't wait for me. She went ahead and ate. And so I just kind of persisted a little bit, and we went out, and we kept going out a little bit more. And she was living in Media at the time. And this was up at Mansfield State College, by the way.
Okay.
And so one weekend during the summer, there's another part of the story. I called down there because I was supposed to drive down and spend a weekend down there at her place. And her mother answered the phone, and I said, "Is Maggie Beatty there?" And her mother says, "There's nobody here by that name," and hung up. And I looked at the phone, and I looked at the phone number that Maggie had written there, and I thought, something's wrong here. So I called back up, and I said, "Is Margaret there?" And she says, "Yes, I will get her." That family is nothing but proper family names. No nicknames in that family at all.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
Oh, yeah. So that was another step two in the thing, so to speak, because if I could make it past the future mother-in-law, then.
Yeah.
And so we pretty much dated all through college. And then I joined the Army. Now, she came from a Navy family. Her dad was at that time still in the Navy Reserves, and her younger brother would later go into the Navy, both as a career. So there was a little bit of friction there. But
I was going to say the Army-Navy games had to be fun.
Oh, actually, it was her mother that was more Navy than her father was.
Really?
Oh, yeah. It was, between the two of us, it was really brutal. No prisoners, bad jokes, the whole. But they're great family. A very loving family and everything. And she decided that she wanted to get married before I went to Vietnam. Mm. So after she graduated and before I went to Vietnam, we got married.
Wow.
And that's kind of before, let's just say I was not the same person that came back that went over.
I hear that a lot from guys who are non-veterans.
Yeah, well, not just non-veterans, but
yes,
any combat veteran that has been through that. I guess to put it in a nutshell, there's things you see that you can't unsee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Things that you hear you can't unhear. Things you smell you can't unsmell. Mm. And in those days, the Army's way of dealing with it was not to deal with it. Hmm. As example, nowadays, when they come back from combat, they're generally put at a place where they have a wind-down period for, I believe it's somewhere around 2 weeks, where they're not allowed to go home. And there's a reason for that, because they're still trying to process what they just been through.
And they need to come down from that adrenaline and fight or flight.
Yeah, I mean, with me, I flew a combat mission on a Monday, left the company on Tuesday, left Vietnam on Wednesday, left Oakland on Friday, and was home Saturday.
Mm. Wow. Talk about a week.
Less than a week.
Talk about a week. Wow.
After flying a combat mission.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's a lot to process.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Maggie had no idea what she was getting herself in for.
Wow.
Which is a whole nother story,
So you were a pilot?
Yes.
Okay.
A helicopter pilot.
That's fascinating to me. I find pilots of any kind very fascinating. And then military on top of that?
It is interesting. I mean, I won't. Actually, the thing about it was, my heroes are the ground troops that we used to put on the ground, because we put them there, and we left, and they stayed there, and they had to stay there the whole time they were there. And I got to go back at the end of the day, after we got our aircraft all set and ready to go for the next day, have a good hot meal, drink a cold beer, take a shower. It's head and shoulders above anything that they had to put up with. So I've seen, guys do things that were incredible. Just make sure we could make it better for the guys on the ground.
That is, that's something you don't think about because they're dropped there.
Yeah.
And they're there, right? That's it.
Yeah. I mean, we put them there. We'd resupply them. Sometimes they'd throw the supplies on the ground and they might throw a wounded on board, which we weren't prepared to do. And then we come pick them up and take them back to their base camp.
Wow.
And we didn't really think too much about it as far as what we were doing, other than we were trying to help them in any way we can.
Yeah.
And to this day, if I see a grunt, in a bar, I'll buy him a beer. Just because, I respect them for what they did.
Yeah. Yeah, that's wow.
Yeah, I mean, I've sat with guys over the years and heard the stories and heard, from the pilots to the ground pounders, and it's a lot. I have a world of respect where I try to thank the veterans when I see them. I try to recognize that we're sitting here not because of anything I've done, but because there are others who have fought for our freedom for generations.
Well, we had, I mean, the grunts were our heroes, and I can almost say that to all the pilots that I've flown with. For me personally, my crew chief and door gunner were my heroes, because we were all the same age, and they were putting their life in my hands and hoping that I didn't screw up.
Yeah.
And medics. Oh my gosh, medics are incredible.
Yeah, I've heard stories about units who, when Doc goes down, they're a little feral.
Yeah. I mean, just listening to what the grunts had to say about them, it was like, for a medic to go down, that was a bad news thing, and sometimes they were targeted because of that.
Oh wow!
But I mean, I don't honestly have a lot of heroes in my life, but grunts, medics, and the backseaters are mine. And I learned very early, and it was a good lesson to learn too as a pilot, that as good as I think I am, when I first went over there, I was going to win the war. I was the world's best pilot. We were all like that.
Yeah, I feel like you have to be.
And until one of my crew chief, an older crew chief, came up to me, and I'm going to quote him, so you might want to. He basically said, "Don't fuck with my aircraft." And what he basically meant was, it's his aircraft. He's allowing me to fly it. And I can't do my job until he does his. And they were very explicit about that.
Yeah.
And I learned early on, you see the war movies, 12 O'Clock High and all the World War II movies, and you see the fighter pilots and the bomber crews and all going off and everything. But you never, ever see what goes on the night before, all night long. The ground crews working on those aircraft to make them flyable.
Well, that's not good for television or for movies.
It's boring.
It's boring. Yeah,
it's absolutely
that's
boring.
Why you don't see it. Yeah.
But it's absolutely the truth.
Well, of course.
Operations will generally know the night before that, okay, we need 10 aircraft flyable for a combat assault the next day. And they send that up to the maintenance platoon, and the maintenance platoon will do whatever they have to do to make sure that there's 10 aircraft flyable, plus spares, because if one goes down, now you need another one.
Yeah.
And that was always the case. Meanwhile, the air crews were all sleeping, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But the maintenance crews are the ones working all night long to make sure that we get the aircraft that we need, and they never show that. So consequently, people don't see that. Like, I used to belong to the Mid-Atlantic Air Museum down there, and one of the things I told people was the fact that you see this airplane sitting here. This is how it would have been during World War II. But what you don't see, and then I explained that whole process of maintenance to them, and most of them are surprised to hear that. because they think an airplane, regardless of what it is always flyable. And sometimes we brought airplanes back that barely made it back, that they would have to fix up and get it ready for the next day's flight.
Well, and I mean, if you're taking ground fire or just even the maintenance hours, you got to rebuild.
Oh,
patch,
it's not an if.
Well, yes.
It's some days it's worse than others, you know. But I mean, from that standpoint, I was fortunate, you know. I mean, we got fired up a couple times, but not as bad as some areas had it.
So, what was the thought process like? Obviously, it was a different generation. It was, you know, getting into the military was a lot more common in that generation than I feel like it was in subsequent generations. But so what was the thought process like to decide to get into the military? And did you ever think about not after you met Maggie?
No.
Okay.
No, to take that one off the table, because, I mean, that was one of the things, you know, when we were talking about that, even probably before we were getting seriously serious, that I would, you know, at that time it was like, okay, yeah, I'm going in the military. In fact, at one point, before I even met her, my freshman year, I went down and talked to the recruiter because college was just not going well. And I was, well, no, okay,
sure.
So spring break, I went down and talked to the recruiter in Easton, you know, and he said, well, where are you at now? And I said, well, I'm a freshman in college. And he says, come back this time you're your senior year. And that was not an answer I was expecting. So that's kind of why I was back in college when Maggie and I met. So the plan all along had been, and plus I'd met a guy that had been an Army helicopter pilot, and just he had an air about him that was just cool. You know, and just and for a young impressionable college kid, you know, like cool was everything. You know?
Yeah, for sure.
And although I was also in a fraternity, which, by the way, I won't mention the fraternity, but if it was probably the most wasted thing I've done in my life.
Oh, wow.
The whole brotherhood thing.
That's interesting because they make such a huge deal about it.
Oh, they do, but actually the whole brotherhood thing boils down to how much money you pay for dues.
Oh, yeah.
You know.
Doesn't everything boil down to money?
I will say, since I graduated in 1969, I went back for a reunion several years ago, and I saw some of my fraternity brothers, you know, but outside of college, I haven't run into a single fraternity brother since then.
Wow.
You know, so, but I will move on, you know, because there's some other things that kind of took precedence over a fraternity. By being in the military. And so anyway, going in was never a question for me. And my fraternity brothers, you know, as supportive as they were supposed to be, all thought I was an idiot for going in the first place. This was in 69. So fast forward, you know, I go to basic, I go to flight school, go to Vietnam. And I learned things about aviation, you know, like, okay, you trust these guys. Everybody trusts each other. They work as a team. We have a crew of 4. In the troop ships, we had Huey gunships. We had a crew of 4 there. Everybody depended on everybody else, and that's where the teamwork and the brotherhood bonds started to form. I'm as close to probably 2 dozen guys now, and we only served together, you know, a year in our lives, 50-some years ago.
Wow. I'm
closer to them. We check up on each other. You know, we help each other out when we do. And the term Band of Brothers is not just a book or a movie. It's a real deal.
Yeah.
And I have closer ties to them. I mean, I love my brother, but I have closer ties to these guys because we were all in the same boat. We saw the same movie, you know.
Yeah, when you go, I feel like when you go through something like that, like what you went through, it brings you close to the people you're with.
Yeah, and I mean, it was. I hear the analogy a lot about athletics, and it's like, yeah, maybe a little bit, but no, because we flew a lot of what we call single ship missions, one aircraft out, you know, and you just did what you had to do. But when we did multiple aircraft missions, you know, regardless of whether it was 2, 4, 5, or 10 aircraft, every single 40 people had to be on the same sheet of music at the same time.
Wow.
And you would do things like, again, Top Gun blows it out to, you know, they don't know what they're talking about. Because there was not a lot of chatter.
Okay.
You know, I mean, yeah, we all sounded like Chuck Yeager from West Virginia, you know, cool aviators, you know, that was the deal, you know. You all wanted to sound like you had a little bit of a Southern accent. But the thing was that you had the lead aircraft might say a few things, the command and control aircraft might say a few things, but everybody else down the line would simply, depending on how they were directed, would either, they had what they called chalk numbers. Lead being 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, how many aircraft you had. And you simply said your number, which meant to everybody you understood what the command was. With the gunships, it was a little different. We generally only had 2, maybe 3 aircraft. But lead might say break, and the wingman might say inbound, and that was it. That's all you'd say.
So what? So you're telling me it's not like it is in Top Gun?
No.
I always assumed that. I mean, obviously it has to be. They're
what
making
was,
movies. So.
What was even worse was Firebirds, the Army's version of Top Gun with the Apaches.
Yeah.
I don't think I ever watched that.
How
did I not watch that?
Well, if you want to see Apaches and a convoluted story, yeah, go ahead. But
so you say gunships. You flew the Huey,
mm-hmm.
and the gunships back then would have been
Hueys.
Okay, Hueys as well.
There were Cobras there. The Cobras got there, I want to say, either late '67 or early '68.
Okay.
And I flew Cobras in the Guard down in Maryland, and it's a really good aircraft. Really, it's fun. It's a go-fast airplane. But I flew the Huey gunships in Vietnam, and we had a crew of 4. We had authorized weapon systems on board, and some weapon systems were not necessarily authorized. It was whatever. And then earlier model gunships that they started out with were woefully underpowered. They could not get off the ground with a full load of bullets and gas. So usually what they did was they limited themselves to about an hour's worth of flying time so they could carry more bullets. And even then they have to bounce down the runway, and the crew chiefs and door gunners used to have to run alongside of it and dive. Yeah.
You serious?
I am serious.
Wow.
I'm picturing that.
I'm glad I'm not the only one picturing this in my head going down the runway.
Oh, you had to see it.
It feels a little Looney Tunes.
That sounds wild.
And early morning takeoffs were better for them because, you know, the air density wasn't as bad. Because it was during the day, it'd get really hot and humid, and you could barely get those things out of their way. But I've seen I got in after we got newer gunships, but there was a better aircraft, stronger engines and everything. But those guys were amazing. And when you hear the term Kentucky windage as far as rifles go, they were doing it with rockets.
Yeah.
and machine guns. We had one fellow that the rockets were basically an aim and shoot, air to ground. And if you kicked it out of trim or pulled a little bit of power, you could make it do a dog leg, which was great because, you know, the enemy would be down there and they'd be seeing the aircraft pointed in one direction. And next thing they know, the rockets be curving in toward them.
Mm-hmm.
Which that's not what the rockets were designed to do.
So there's an art. Oh man. Okay.
Yeah, there was. There's all kinds of.
Just using the downdraft to pitch it.
It's all
just a hair.
relative wind.
Yeah.
All relative wind when it comes out of the tube, and whichever way you had it pointed. Sometimes that was on purpose. Sometimes it was a mistake. But yeah, we had some good shooters back in those days, and it was a different mindset to fly a gunship than it was because I mean, and this is something I didn't think about, you know, kind of touching a little bit on the faith issue, because now it was my job to go out and kill people, and it's just the way it was.
Yeah, there's a hard element to what is war and what is necessary, but then how your faith fits in. I have been doing youth ministry post 9/11, and I've grown with some of the men and fathers who have been in, Afghanistan or Iraq post 9/11 as fathers with them and alongside them, hearing some of their stories from that time, hearing how they're trying to reconcile what they went through and their faith.
The interesting thing about that is a lot of the things I struggled with, that is not really high on the list, to be honest with you. I did it, and at the time I thought, well, okay, I did it. And we never really talked about it all that much.
Yeah.
I mean, it was for us, our biggest job, my job as a wingman was to make sure lead does not get shot down, no matter what. And then our jobs were to protect the troop ships, no matter what. And if it took putting us in between us and the enemy, then that's what we did. That was just part. We didn't think about that either. It was just part of what we did, how we were trained to do it, and it wasn't as simple as it was just a job, because it was more than that, and we knew that. But I mean, the things I struggled with, or some of the things I saw over there, and my best friends that died over there. Probably I've struggled with that more than anything, and probably the worst thing that I still think about almost every day is the guy that was sitting right there that died. And I actually didn't even realize how bad it was, until we actually got the thing on the ground at the hospital. They unloaded him and everybody else, and we hovered off, and I went to pull my helmet off, and there's what they call a greenhouse window that sits right over top of both pilot seats, and there was a hole right there.
Oh my!
And I thought, that was close.
Wow.
And so, yeah, that one's come back to, to just, I don't want to make light of it, because it was probably as close that I'll never know as us not having this conversation right now.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I've heard from a lot of guys, is it's about the people next to them. That's why they're there. That's why they're fighting. And the faith fits into that moment, not the big picture.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, And normally while you're going through all this stuff, while it's happening, you really don't think a whole lot about it because you're just trying to do what you have to do to make things happen. And then when you get back and you have a beer or 10, and it's like,
That's when you actually have time
that was pretty close.
to reflect on it.
Yeah. So, yeah, I brought all that stuff home.
So when did you get out of the military?
December 2002.
Okay.
The second time.
The second time.
The first time when I got back from Vietnam, we were living in Maryland at the time, and let's just say I had an attitude. So when we got back into the States and everything, and I owed some money for overdrawn leave and everything, and the guy says, "Well, are you going to extend?" And I said, "Hell no." And he said, "Well, it's going to cost you." And I said, "Okay." So they did get me a ticket back to Baltimore. That was nice. So we were living in Bel Air, Maryland at the time, and I kept hearing these Hueys. And what I didn't know was those Hueys, and turned out that there was a National Guard Air Cav troop that the armory was in Bel Air. They had Hueys. So I got home in October of 71, and by December I was in the Maryland Guard, raising my right hand and saying, "I swear to uphold the Constitution of Maryland, and yes, I want to fly your Hueys." And so, and unbeknownst to me, mentally, that was as well as the fact that I was going to get to fly again, that did more to help, because at that time, probably 95% of us were Vietnam vets, and we talked a lot, and that was good.
Yeah, somebody to talk to about.
We had somebody to talk to.
That can relate.
Maggie had no idea what I was even dreaming about. I was having nightmares, and we'd be sitting at the club having a beer, and somebody'd say, "Yeah, I had a nightmare," and next thing you know, we're all talking about it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and it did lead back to the whole point in the beginning that I was going to make the military my career. But when I got back from Vietnam, I was like, I don't know. I want to make the military my career. But then, it did come full circle, and I went back on active duty and came up here.
So you did you said you retired out in 2002, so that's another 30 years.
Yep. Yeah, I had 33 years total.
And you've done a lot. Because I've heard your name mentioned a couple times with guys who are up here at our National Guard base. So, I mean, you're still known up here. But you've done a lot with Fort Indiantown Gap.
Yeah.
And we've got, Chinooks and Blackhawks up here now.
Yep.
So did you work with the transition from the Huey to the Blackhawk? And the
I
Chinook?
did, yeah. I did get the Cobra transition back in Maryland, but then I went back to Huey's and became an instructor pilot in the Huey's, and that's what I got hired up at the Gap as, a UH-1 instructor pilot, and then got the Blackhawk transition, and that was fun too.
I was going to say, those are beasts of an airframe.
It's got more power than it knows what to do with itself. I mean, with a Huey, all the troop ships had hooks on them. It wasn't a lot to do sling loads with a Huey. It just didn't have the power. I was doing training down in Alabama on the Black Hawk on a hot July afternoon. I mean, a blazing hot afternoon.
In Alabama in July.
Yeah. And that's all you got to say. And it's we put a 6,000-pound load on that hook, and it climbed out at 80% power.
Oui.
I mean, you didn't have to pull the guts out of it. And this was an Alpha model Black Hawk, one of the early ones. And I'm just sitting there, and the instructor pilot's looking over, and he says, "What's the matter?" And I said, "We're flying." He says, "Well, of course we are. We're in a Black Hawk." And I said, "In July." with a 6,000-pound load, and he says, yeah, we are. I mean, it was amazing.
So that was just something that was wildly different from the.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I was fortunate. Most of the time I have is in Hueys, and I love the Huey. It's a great aircraft. I love flying the Black Hawk. I love flying the Cobra. I guess the bottom line is it doesn't matter as long as the wings aren't stiff and I can get it off the ground. I'd like to fly it.
That's awesome.
Now, one of the things that you have shared with me a bit that tease out a bit, you have helped restore a Huey.
Yes.
Now, you were very particular, and you can explain that as well about your help in that Huey.
Yeah, it was probably about 10 years ago. I heard about that. They're going to bring a Huey back to life down at Lancaster. So, I was maybe about 9 years ago. I went down and I said, hi, here I am. And to be clear, I was willing to do almost anything with that Huey except turn a wrench. And I had several reasons for it. One, I was never trained to be a mechanic. And number two, I didn't want to take that job away from the mechanics that we had there. I felt that was why they were there. They wanted it. They enjoyed working on Hueys. That was their job to do. And there's plenty of other things that I could do there. As it turned out, they were trying to raise money, and they had a 5K race along the runway, and I ran it the first time, and I could tell right away just by the time the race was over that the people that were organizing this thing were not runners and had no idea how to run a race. So I talked to the president and I said, look, let me run next year's race and I'll make more money than you know.
Yeah.
And so I did, and we did. We made quite a bit of money. The following year, we did the same thing, so I turned it into a moneymaker.
Yeah, well, you were more qualified to run that than it sounds
by
like.
Running a single race, I was more qualified than anybody else down there.
I mean, they just knew that they were looking to raise money.
Exactly.
And this was like, oh, we're going to do this, but nobody had any experience?
No,
okay.
Nobody had any experience.
Got it.
And so there was another couple there that, they did the marketing end of it, and I did the race end of it as far as organizing the race and getting there's companies out there that will run races for you. Pretzel City is one of them. That's who we worked with. And they were giving away hats. Well, hats cost money.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of money.
Mm-hmm.
Runners don't want hats. They want a medal. Something that they can hang on the wall.
Yeah, 100%.
And a medal, G&L trophies up there has, they have good medals and everything. So, and that's a whole lot cheaper, than it is to give away a hat and everything. So, we kind of reorganized the groups, the age groups, the medals. The track was, a lot of people liked the fact that they were going to run on part of a runway. And that was an attraction to run that race, so.
That does sound pretty fun, to be honest with you.
I mean, now, the airport wasn't
Thrilled,
but they said, okay, you've got the runway from 8 to 8:30. If there's anybody on the runway at 8:30, we're going to pick them up and throw them out. And I said that to the runners. I said, because I know there was some people that would walk the race. I said, you got to be off that runway by 8:30. And regardless of how much you paid, if you're not off the runway, we're going to take you off the runway because they want their runway back.
Sure.
And I think we only had one guy that complained. He shouldn't have been in a race in the first place. But
there's
anyway.
always one.
There's always one. That's right.
But so yeah, I was doing things like that. Before I retired, I was a safety officer with the Army, so I became their safety manager. And wrote, with the help of another guy, I wrote their safety management program. So, I mean, there was a lot I did do, and we got it running. And as far as I know, they're still flying.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and I think I ended up with about 4 hours of flying time with it.
Nice.
But, you know, the interesting thing, I wasn't worried about flying the Huey because I know how to fly a Huey. A few years before that, they used to keep the Dutch Country Helicopters used to run the hangar there. And they had a flight school there for helicopters. And they had a Sikorsky 300, which if you look at a Sikorsky 300, it's a little small bubble thing. It's what the Army used to call the TH-55 Osage, which is what I learned how to fly on. And the only difference between the two helicopters is the one at Dutch Country was painted white, and the one painted out at Fort Walters, Texas, was painted orange. That's it. It had the same twist grip throttle to it. And I said, yeah, because the difference, they said, do you want to fly the Robinson? And I said, no, I'll fly the Sikorsky. And so we took it out for about an hour, and I hovered it without scaring the instructor. And we did some traffic patterns down at Lancaster. And, I don't know, after about 20 minutes or 30 minutes, he said, well, do you want to do some auto rotations? And I'm thinking, sure, why not? So we did. And I didn't break it. And about halfway down, he says, don't forget you level it. Now, with a Huey, you keep what's known as a flare in all the way almost to the ground. With helicopters like the Sikorsky or Bell Jet Rangers and stuff, just before touchdown, you level it before you start to cushion. And the reason is so you don't snap off the tail boom, which is important to have a good landing, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, it was fun. I was more worried because that has a twist grip throttle that doesn't have a governor to it, which means every time you move the collective, you got to move the throttle along with it. And you have certain parameters on the RPMs, engine RPMs, to keep in mind. Whereas a Huey, you can push and yank and jerk all day long, and it's got a governor in the back that'll keep you from underspeeding or overspeeding. So
that's one thing I have to always kind of commend, especially helicopter pilots. Like, you've got 4 different things going on with 4 different limbs, and some of that's even what you're doing with your hands. It's just impressive the amount of coordination that takes and you have.
Walk, chew gum, and rub your stomach all at the same time.
Yeah, I can't do that.
The hardest thing to learning how to fly a helicopter is to hover. If you just go on YouTube and watch movies. I mean, it's scary to watch, but we've all done that. And the whole thing about it is the over control. And when I say over control, and I'm showing them the circle with my forefinger and my thumb, if you move the cyclic, which is the center control, more than that circle, you're over controlling it. So, and if you move one control, you're going to move the collective. In the case of the Sikorsky or the TH-55, you also have to move the throttle all at the same time, along with the pedals.
It seems like a lot to do all at once.
Yes.
Yeah, my uncle, he used to fly the state police chopper.
Yeah.
And those were the Bell Rangers when he flew them. And it was always neat watching him. He would fly it up to the camp that we would go to in the summer, or a couple other spots where he landed. And it was neat watching and understanding some of that mechanic that is just, you're balancing a lot of things all at once.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a balance of time and space and motion, and it's 3 axes that you're dealing with. But after you think about it, and you've gone through it, and they're not going to let you hover, or they're actually not going to let you solo, or at least when we were learning. until you learn how to hover, until you learn how to do auto rotations. That was the big thing. And that's usually roughly about a week's worth of training. It goes by pretty quick. I mean, if I had, if I needed, wanted to take you guys up and let you fly straight and level, we could do that today.
That seems dangerous.
I'll stand the ground.
Oh, it's actually flying a helicopter is not, everybody, thanks to the media, thinks it's the most dangerous aircraft out there. It's not.
It's one of the because
It's
of auto
perception.
rotation. You can actually land on near empty tank or a dead engine.
Yeah.
I knew that one.
Yeah, and it's I can land that thing, pretty much anywhere that if I can fit the rotor system in there, I can land the aircraft. Or as in some cases, if the landing zone isn't as big as the rotor system, I'll make it bigger. It might be a little loud, and some branches are going to leave the trees.
Definitely takes a level of talent that most people don't have.
Yes and no, but I think it's more of a question that if you had the same level of training that I did, and it's more of a question of whether or not it's one desire I had was I wanted to learn how to fly more than anything else. That was almost a passion for me.
Mm-hmm. And
I was willing to go through just about anything between basic training and flight school to get to where I wanted to go. I'm going to say almost all. In fact, I went to a reunion last month out in Reno with the guys I flew with. And we're all 75, 80-year-olds, but if, when we look like, geez, what's keeping these guys still alive,
Yeah.
But if you look into their eyes, every one of us has that same desire we used to have, that we could get into a helicopter, any helicopter on the planet, and still fly it.
Mm.
And we could. Might be a little slower than most, but we could still do it. So.
All right, so we're gonna land the thing right here.
Okay.
Pun definitely intended.
Yes.
We're gonna take a refreshing my drink break. RMD, right?
Yeah. RMD, refreshing my drink.
And we're going to come back because I got a couple more questions that we haven't even gotten into yet.
Oh,
and
my
we're at
gosh.
the 45-minute mark.
Yeah. So
I can talk forever.
Well, we're giving you a second part.
Yeah, we're going to give you part 2 since we're all here, and why not, right?
This has been a bit of an intense episode. I got some questions for you.
Okay.
Like away from that period of your life into the later part and education
Yeah, I'd like to dig into that a little bit. Not that all the military stuff is not amazing, but that's not the only thing that you are.
That's true.
So
yes.
Yeah, and we definitely should touch on some of that a little bit too, because there are other things that you bring to the table.
We didn't even have drinks in hands, and you two were out there talking about crabs and crab picking, and we haven't even gotten into any of these things.
That's another part of my life too.
Yeah. So we're gonna refresh our drinks.
Yeah.
Kenny, we're coming back for your warm nuggies in 2 weeks.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
All right. Well, yeah. So we're going to do part 2. So we're going to wrap part 1 up here. Thank you for hanging with us.
And I'm going to say this, cheers and thank you to the men and women who have served in every age in this country. Don, you have been a phenomenal individual to get to know, to hear your heart. I appreciate and I am grateful for your service and for the men and women you served with and the others who have served through the generations.
It was an honor to do so.
Yeah.
It was an honor.
I couldn't possibly say it any better, Rob. But
cheers to our service members.
Likewise, and cheers, and we'll catch you again in 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Thanks for listening to The Drunk Squirrel. No need to pay a tab. Just be sure to follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and drop us a line, thedrunksquirrel82@gmail.com. Cheers.